One of the biggest challenges of transitioning from a learning center at school to a virtual learning center is definitely the working and scoring of the PACEs. Without being there in person to answer a student's flag, how could it be possible for students to score their work? When our school was evaluating how this could be accomplished, our goal was to maintain the integrity of the A.C.E. procedure manual while making accommodations for the virtual environment. In this video, we would like to share our procedures for students to complete their Pacework and how we adapted the scoring procedures. Please remember to take into consideration your school's specific needs and virtual environment when developing your procedures. Let's start with Pacework. In order to assist the student in completing their Pacework, you will want to ensure that they are setting appropriate goals. You should be sensitive to the fact that the student's virtual environment may pose a challenge for them. Do everything you can to assist them with this key principle of working paces. We will cover goal setting in more detail in the video Goal Setting and Goal Checking. For your students to complete their work, the process is primarily the same. They will work through the PACE just as if they were in the Learning Center. They will need to stop at score strips and contact the monitor to score. If there is a supervisor score strip, they will need to stop and contact their supervisor to have that scored. There should not be any major differences in the procedures for a student to complete their work. The only difference is instead of raising their flag, they would communicate through text messages or video conferencing with their monitor or supervisor. Now, you want to stress that the students should be working in an environment that will help them focus on their Pacework. We covered this in detail in our video Setup Transitioning to Home. Please view that if you haven't already. Homework. How do we manage homework when they're already at home? One suggestion could be to have an email template created previously in which your staff would simply need to enter the student's name and homework goals and then send it on to the parents. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just make sure it gets the point across. You also want to make certain the parents understand that they must respond to the email, even if it is with a simple thank you. We would also suggest you have a separate email template created for when students have finished their goals within the day. It could be short, congratulating the students on the completion of all their work and encouraging the parents to also congratulate them. Remember, the virtual learning center will feel different to many of your students, and they have different levels of achievement while in this environment. Evaluate each student individually and try to consider all of the variables before addressing homework. Also, maintain communication with the student's parents. We are working together as a team, and their input will be very important in deciding if a student needs to have homework or if the student's goals would simply require modification. Always remember to pray when making these evaluations. The student should still have the same goal of 12 paces in each subject for the year. For a suggestion on other staff procedures for homework, we have provided some information in our video Setup, Establishing Your Procedures. Now that we've talked about how the PACEs worked, let's talk about how scoring is achieved. As I mentioned, students will have to interact with their monitor or supervisor as they come across the built-in score strips at the end of each section or the supervisor score strips. While the students weren't able to raise the flags to score, our school put into place some procedures that stayed close to the A.C.E. procedures manual. When a student came to a score strip, they would send a text message to the monitor, informing the monitor they were ready to score. The monitor would then reply that they could enter the video conferencing platform or if there was a student ahead of them. Once in the platform, the monitor would make a notation on the daily student contact log, writing down the subject, pace number, and pages to be scored. Our school developed this form to help keep track of student interactions and make any notes concerning the student's scoring. The monitor would retrieve the score key and turn to the pages to be scored. The student then read the answers to the monitor. This step still gives the student the opportunity to take responsibility for their scoring. As the student read the answers, the monitor would mark the answers that are incorrect with a pencil onto the score key. Once the student had read all of the answers, the monitor would tell the student which answers were incorrect, so that they could mark the answers incorrect with a blue or black pen. We didn't ask our students to use red pens because we didn't want them to get in a habit of having a red pen at home. A small warning here: be careful not to give the students too much information as you score. You want them to take the responsibility of going back and correcting their mistakes. Once the student had made the corrections, they needed to contact their monitor again and repeat the process. The only difference is that the monitor would then mark on his log that the student was rescoring. If the answer was correct, the monitor erased the mark and asked the student to circle his mark. This will help you to identify if a student has forgotten to rescore. If multiple students are working in the same pace, you can have different symbols to identify different students. A.C.E.'s incorrect answers are marked with a check mark, and Pudge's incorrect answers are marked with a circle. If the student has scored the same questions more than 2 times, you would want to refer them to the supervisor for academic assistance. Ensure the monitor communicates with the supervisor that the student is having difficulties. Students will also have various supervisor score strips throughout the PACE. These activities could include writing paragraphs, addressing envelopes, or reciting verses after a self-test. The process for contacting the supervisor was the same for our students. Once the student and supervisor were connected, the student would place their PACE in front of the camera on the subject in question. This would allow the supervisor to look over the work and provide feedback to the student. Depending on the device the student is using, this can be accomplished a couple of ways. One way is for the student to hold the PACE up in front of the camera. This may require a steady hand. Another way is to use a tripod like this one to place the device over the test. These can be found for a relatively small price. Once the supervisor listened to the student recite the verse or looked over the necessary pages and had given feedback, the student would return to their work. The supervisor then made any notations on the daily student contact log. This helps to keep record of supervisor score strips that have been scored. These were the steps we took to fulfill the work and scoring of PACEs. With a few modifications, a student should be able to progress with a continued sense of normalcy. We feel we were able to maintain the integrity of the trail of a PACE while adapting to our new environment. We hope this video has been able to offer some assistance, and we encourage you to view the other videos in this series as we continue to talk about the Virtual Learning Center.